Welcome back, everybody. And today we're going to be speaking with Robert Bartlett again. And I was just looking at my the back catalogue to see if previous people I'd spoken to see when I last spoke to Robert. And amazingly, it was August 24, so over a year. So how time flies. But anyway, welcome back, Robert. Thank you again for sparing time to come and talk to us. Appreciate you taking a little time out. Just before we kick off, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on why, or the particular topic we're going to talk about antimony today, or antimony, however you like to say it. And it's a bit of an interesting one for me because in the Indian tradition, there are a few elements in there. You could think about it as their periodic table. So they do this nice diagram with all the materials that are most commonly used. Mercury sits at the top, and then you've got these great materials, lesser materials, intermediary materials, metals, gemstones, toxic plants, that kind of thing. There are a few materials within that tree which are a bit difficult to either identify, or there's a little bit of mystery around what they actually are. So you've got a material like chapala. Chapala just means to sort of move, like run, like a water, but be thicker than water. Or kankushta, which is this. It doesn't really explain it, just that it's yellow, it causes purgation, and it's a sort of a strongly, probably plant-based, but there's no definite on that. So there are a few materials which always kind of get me, because obviously it's difficult to actually say I'd like to do that, because you've got to first identify what it is, and there's lots of ideas about what those materials can be. Anyway, antimony is a little bit like that. It appears as it's upper rasa. It's just described as, it's called Anjana. So we know Anjana is related to the eyes, or good for the eyes, and it's commonly identified as antimony. But I noticed, particularly I was in India, Sri Lanka, quite often it's substituted by a lead sulfide, galena. So it's a bit of a weird one. I worked a little bit with it in Sri Lanka. There was an indigenous doctor there who was very into using it, but ironically, he wasn't really using it for any eye treatments. He was grinding it up, making a paste, and preparing for bone fractures and things like that. So he was very adept at working with it. He really liked that material. So aside from that, and I've done a little bit of processing with the raw material myself, I'm not really that fluid with it, or understanding its real use in Rasa Shastra. It's a bit of an outlier for me. But when I got interested, or met people who were interested in the Western tradition, it's sort of one of the major materials that everybody's using. It's like this really, really important material. And I just thought, I wonder why that is. So I thought the best person to ask would be yourself. You're obviously an expert, and you've written extensively on this. I think both your books there's an extensive section on antimony in both those books. So I thought it'd be great to have you on and try and get a little bit of background understanding about why this material is so important, and what's its attraction. Why has the Western tradition been so drawn to its use, and what are its properties? How is it used? I just like to compare that with what I know of it in the Rasa Shastra tradition, and see if I can try to understand how the two kind of mesh together.
Yeah, but I always found it interesting that East and West, it has been used for several thousand years as an eye pigment. You see the ancient Egyptians, they all have the eyeliner, the mascara, and that was made from antimony and galena. Both of those were used, and so there's that same confusion, East and West, between antimony. I know in my studies on Eastern uses, in Rasa Shastra, they mention Anjana and Srotanjana as antimony compounds, but like you said, it's very confusing. They list about 5 of each, and only 1 or 2 are actually antimony stibnite, antimony sulfide. The others are stibnite contaminated with a lot of lead, and one is just straight out lead, sulfide, galena, and others are not well described. So they're kind of cloudy what they actually are. And as far as I recall, there's only, their preparation is pretty simple. They do the it's a sweating yantra where
Mm.
you take a pot and you put in a decoction of triphala and bringaraj herbs, and it's called the Svedana
Yeah, swayed enough to
yantra.
steam, probably like a
Yeah,
Doliant for the. It's like a bolus that swings above the steaming liquid and just gets a nice sweat going.
yeah. Well, this they stretch a cloth across the top of the pot containing the liquids and sprinkle the antimony on
Mm.
top and cover that with another one and let it steam for several hours. And that's the shodan, the purification. And that's all they do really. After that is just grinding it to a paste. And then it's generally applied topically, especially for the eyes, um, and for broken joints. But it's usually applied externally. I couldn't find too much about internal preparations for the antimony. In the West, quite a different story is that the Egyptians used it for eyeliner, mainly for its antifungal and parasitic dispersive properties on the eyes, and they called it kohl, and it was the eyeliner. You see all the Egyptian figures have the dark eyeliners, and even today you can find in beauty supplies they have the kohl pencils.
Mm.
They don't make it with antimony anymore, but it's still called kohl. And kohl actually originally meant a very fine powder or an ash. And when alchemy moved into the Arabic world, they added al to it, and it became alcohol.
Mm.
And for a very long time, the word alcohol meant a very fine powder or ash. And so when you're reading old alchemical texts, um, they're kind of time dependent. It wasn't until 1200 or so that the word alcohol was applied to distilled wine spirits. And so the alcohol we buy today is very different from the alcohol that some of the early alchemical texts talk about.
Mm.
They're talking about a very fine powder or an ash when they're talking about alcohol. Um, so that it's related to the term elixir. Um, the term comes from the Greek xerion, meaning a very fine powder or an ash.
Mm.
And then again in the Arabic world, it became al-ixir and ultimately became elixir. And both of those terms are deeply related to antimony and its products.
Mm.
Um, one thing about antimony, I have a couple of show and tell things I could show you here. I brought a piece in. This is a piece of antimony, stibnite.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it grows very large crystals that are very nice. And there are two main things well, two main processes that are common in Western alchemy, and that's making the tincture of antimony. Um, and this was started out. Antimony has a strange history. There wasn't too much activity until a text written by a Benedictine monk, so he says, Basil Valentine. And this was maybe 1400s. Paracelsus mentions him. And there's some people who consider Paracelsus was actually maybe the author, but because they have very similar writing style. But
Mm.
Basil Valentine wrote his book called The Triumphal Chariot of Antimony. And it didn't come out until about 1603. Um, but he pretty much set antimony on its course. It became the guidebook for the work on antimony, and it reads much like a modern textbook on chemistry of antimony. He talks about how to prepare it, how to make various types of medicine just from antimony, and there's so many ways you can manipulate it. He says that one man's life isn't long enough to fathom all the secrets of antimony. And I believe it because there's so many things that you can do with the antimony and process it to create tinctures. And he talks about curing his fellow monks of things like leprosy, cancer, using these antimony tinctures.
Okay.
And one of his main processes is to take the antimony, the ore, and you grind that up and roast it until it turns into a white oxide. And then you take that and fuse it in a furnace, very high temperature. You need to get about 1,000 degrees, and it will fuse into a glass like this.
Oh, wow.
It's actually they put a light behind it here so you
Chocolate
can
color, is it?
see.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah. It's like amber, isn't it?
Yeah. And you can get different colors too,
Wow. It looks like it's
depending
got
on,
like little sort of compartments in it as well. Is that just bubbles or
it's
just
got some
part of the
bubbles in
structure?
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you get various colors. That's a deep red. Here's one that's yellow.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I've gotten greens, blues, as you can get.
How would you modulate the colors? And are you mixing something with it, or is it just pure
Time
temperature?
and temperature,
Yeah.
and I believe somewhat the impurities in the ore make a difference too. If there's a lot of copper, it tends towards greenish colors. Cobalt impurities makes a very deep blue, cobalt blue.
Hmm.
Um, but once you have the glass that is ground up to a powder, and then it's extracted in two ways. One is to make what he calls a fixed tincture, and he also makes an unfixed tincture.
Okay.
So the fixed tincture, you start with your ground up glass and you extract it with a strong vinegar solution. And then you'll end up with this colored extract, like a tea. Um, and then you'll evaporate that down and you end up with this gummy residue. And that gummy residue, then you extract that with a strong alcohol, and you'll end up with a tincture.
Right.
So from that antimony, here's a sample of the oil.
Okay.
It's also very dark, but it's a deep red. I don't know if the light could even get through here.
Yeah,
No.
it's sort of catching it on the edge. I can see it's a reddish orange color when it's where the light's catching it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's diluted for use. You dilute it into a
Oh, right.
tincture.
So just in
Um,
more alcohol, just dilute it down again and again, and
yeah, and it's safer to take that way.
it's quite toxic. So I mean,
Yeah,
what's
antimony
the
is it's related to arsenic.
hmm,
They're in the same column in the periodic table, and they share a lot of the same properties. So, as the ore and even as the glass, they're still very toxic.
hmm,
Um, but as you produce the tincture, there's no more antimony present. Or if it is, it's at parts per billion level. I've measured samples of tincture I've made using instruments I had access to,
hmm.
and the highest I saw was maybe around 9 parts per billion
Wow.
antimony, which is pretty insignificant and probably therapeutic at that level. But there are other compounds. I've counted up to 100 different compounds in the oil that you obtain. I mean, they're as complex as any vegetable essential oil.
Hmm.
So I've done like gas chromatography and liquid chromatography to separate out the compounds. Um, I have uh, I have some I've been isolating some of the components. And there's a strange fluorescence. You can see here a picture of
Oh wow, yeah.
fluorescent compounds. There's one blue and one green,
Wow.
and those are just two of the components. I've isolated them here. I'm trying to identify what they are, but
When you take it apart and look at it structurally, are there any other elements present? Are you seeing anything you can identify to what might be giving that effect?
they're organic, and there are a number of organic compounds present. Um, Very little on the metal side. So the antimony actually polymerizes the solvent.
Mm,
So it takes the solvent and links it together to create the oil. It's not like you're actually extracting the oil out of it, but the antimony acts as like a catalyst to polymerize the solvent, and you end up with numerous compounds in there, and repeatedly the same compounds come out. So part of my work is trying to identify it, what the different compounds are. When I went to the PRS, Paracelsus Research Society in Salt Lake City, um, antimony was Frater Albertus's favorite subject as well.
mm,
And we spent Secunda class, the second year class, was 2 weeks just on antimony. 2 weeks, 8 hours a day, um, just on antimony, and we just scratched the surface. And then later, when I worked at Paralab, we developed tinctures from the antimony. We had a fixed and unfixed antimony tincture line, and I gathered samples from that, and I've used them over the years to try and do analysis, and I've run them through gas chromatography, mass spec, um, gathered quite a bit of information on those things. And I've seen them used medicinally. I've used them myself medicinally over years, and seen them do amazing things. People with tumors that disappear.
mm. That makes a lot of sense to me because obviously, like you said, they're in the periodic table. They're in the same, the same range of elements, and of course, arsenic is used a lot for that in Rasa Shastra. So arsenic has that property as well. It's very good for certain types of cancer. Rasa manica is like a quite commonly used one. So you literally just cook it's the arsenic sulfide until you just end up with that red, similar kind of thing. You end up with like a sort of a red glass. It's like a false ruby, and then that will be
Yeah,
ground down, and they use that for all kinds of treatments around. So
yeah,
it just makes a lot of sense. It's a similar family.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It was. It wasn't even a month after I had taken the class, Secunda class at PRS, and I got back home. I lived in the middle of Idaho in the primitive area at the time, and I was anxious to do some work on antimony. And I was sitting in one of the local pubs, and a friend walks in and sits down and asks me if I want a job. And I said, "Yeah, sure. What do you got?" And he said, "I want you to take over my job mining where I am." Um, and I asked him what he's mining. Stibnite.
Wow.
And
Weird.
what are the odds? Antimony is not that common, and to learn about it and then suddenly sit down and somebody offer you a job mining antimony, it
Wow.
was pretty synchronistic.
Did you take the
So
job? Did
I did.
yeah.
I went right down and talked to the mine owner and convinced him I could do the job, because here was this like 6'6" mountain man, was offering me the job that he was doing, and I got down there, and here's skinny mini me. I I convinced the guy I could do the work and do the job, and we talked geology and chemistry of antimony and stuff. So I convinced him I was the guy for the
How
job.
long did
So
you last doing?
um, I lasted until the mine caved in. We
Oh my God.
for 2 seasons. So we got into a place where the mountain had slid and all the rock was broken up. And the guy I was working with, he was an old timer miner. He'd been mining for 40 or 50 years. So he spent his whole life underground mining, and we had just broken into this seam of antimony. It was pretty high grade, and so we mucked it all out, and pulled it outside and started putting in the timbers. And the timbers were like 18-inch round fir uh, logs,
Yeah.
basically. And we put the two pillars in and the cap, and we were starting to put the cross pieces in. And the guy says, I think you better stand back. I think it's going to do something. And we stood back a set, and suddenly this rock, the size of a Volkswagen, fell out of the ceiling right where we had been standing.
Oh my
And then
God.
the walls started caving in, and we're moving back down the tunnel there. And another set goes down, and then another, and pretty soon we're rapidly walking down the tunnel there as the whole thing was collapsing, behind us. So it took out about 8 sets, all in all.
Could you get back in
And
to retrieve that again? Is it possible to go back in once that?
no, it was
Oh,
so broken up.
yeah.
The mine owner, he just said, "Forget it. We're going to move somewhere else." And
Wow. What an
he found
experience.
a silver deposit and started a silver mine. But I quit there because there was all this antimony that it wasn't commercially enough to do anything, but it was enough for me to get like 30 or
A
40
lifetime
pounds.
supply.
so, so I had lots of antimony to work with suddenly, and um, it was
Wow,
a
what an
funny.
incredible story. I mean, just out of interest, are there any associated minerals found with antimony? Is it like, like lead and silver is quite commonly found together? Is it the same
Yeah.
thing with antimony? Do you find a lot of things? Is it maybe gold or something like that? Is that associated?
Silver and lead were common. We
Mm.
also found some deposits of scheelite, which is a tungsten ore, pretty spotty. But I remember we'd blast into the area, with 80 sticks of dynamite and clean it all out, and then you come in and it's like stars in there. All the little sparkles. Mostly it was pyrite
Wow.
crystals, and you'd shine your light on. We had the little carbide lanterns,
I know
on our
carbon.
helmets, and it was old school.
Oh my
um,
God. That's incredible.
and it was like just stars everywhere.
I couldn't do that in a
It's pretty
million
amazing.
years. I'd be far too claustrophobic to go down and do it. I mean, I did it
Uh,
once in Sri Lanka. I got invited to one of the guys I was working with at the hospital. He had a gem mine, and I said I wanted some gems to work with. So he said, "Oh, just come and get them yourself from the," not literally like that, but literally come and see what it's all about. And I went down into these open, just basically a pit. It's sort of like a 30, 40 foot pit that goes down into the ground. And then they just go
yeah.
off in four directions, or whichever way they feel they want to go. They've got this technique where they put an iron rod in the ground and sort of crunch it around and then look at the end of it. And by the types of scratches, they can tell what type of gems might be in
Oh,
the area. So they literally, it's really primitive. And I went down this shaft and I thought, well, that's it. And then leading off of the shaft, you've got these really small one man tunnels that are literally just propped up with twigs. I mean, not with
yeah.
twigs. And they were saying, "Come, come, come!" And of course, these guys were quite small. I'm not huge,
yeah.
but I'm a lot bigger than they were, and I could just about get down this tunnel. And it was half
Yeah.
filled with water as well because they're very near the
Oh,
water.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought, no way, I'm not going down there. And they just were wearing like little candles on the end of their hats. Like,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is old.
I
Yeah,
thought,
it's amazing. It's always raining underground. Um, we
incredible.
had we had ways we had to pump water out sometimes, and we had a reservoir because the drill we used water, and so we sectioned off an area where we could use it as a water collection reservoir, and instead of hauling water in and out. Um, and we were about 700 feet into the mountain there, had a turn or so. I like to, at the end of the day, I would turn my lantern off, and it was just black. There's no light whatsoever in there, and I could feel my way out with where the tire treads of the scoot
God.
tram was, I'd come around the turn and I would see like a star. It was the portal way off in
Mm.
the distance, and it was all black except for this little star. And then you get closer and closer, and pretty soon you see streams of light coming in, and then you see a whole new world,
Wow.
develop outside. It's pretty amazing.
And what was it actually like to sort of, how were they actually digging it out? Just literally by hand, just breaking off
We
chunks?
had a drill. It was basically a jackhammer on a long leg, a pneumatic leg, and we had air hoses that we dragged in all the way down in there, and at the time there was no like occupational safety board. We were
Mm.
in there like a jackhammer in and no earplugs or anything like that. So
Wow.
it's like running a jackhammer in your bathroom. You can imagine the sound, and we'd be doing that for like 4 hours
Oh my
drilling.
God.
Um,
Incredible.
so it
What
was
about air? What about, did you need to pump air down there? I mean, it's 700
yeah, we
meters.
had air pumps. We had like uh, it was irrigation ducting, and we channeled air from an air compressor outside into the face where we were working.
I was going to say, I suppose the guy you were working with, when he said you better step back, it's going to do something. Probably that's years of intuition down there, just
Oh
listening
yeah,
to the
he saved me
creaks
a
and
couple of times. He saved
wow.
me a couple of times. We were drilling once, and he gives me a sign to stop. He pulls the drill out. This big slab of rock falls down, and he just like nonchalantly goes back to drilling.
Incredible.
I got flattened a few times. Um, Small amount of rock fell out of the ceiling and just slammed me right to the ground. It was
Wow.
maybe a bucket full of dirt, and another time I got a rock maybe the size of a walnut hit me right in the shoulder bone, and it just like wiped out my shoulder for the whole day.
Oh my God. Incredible. I'm just trying to sort of get the continuity of it all. So basically, before 1400, this doesn't really appear in any Western texts either, or if it does, it's more in association with the kohl and the eye treatments. Or I'm trying to
Um,
understand where it comes from and why it becomes so popular.
it has some interesting properties, and that's something that Basil Valentine talks about. The other product is what they call the regulus of antimony, and this is where you actually take the antimony and extract the metal from it. So here's an example of the metal,
Oh wow, yeah, very shiny, almost like
and it
tin.
has kind of a starry pattern. They call it the star regulus of antimony,
Mm.
or the Marshall regulus of antimony, because they use iron to pull the sulfur out. So you use iron with your ground up antimony, and you fuse that, and the iron steals all the sulfur off of the antimony and leaves the antimony naked, and
Mm.
it falls down as a liquid metal to the bottom of the crucible. And then you pour that out, and you have your uh, regulus, and they call it the Marshall regulus because it has iron in the preparation.
Hmm.
Um, and this was one of the ways that was popular to make the Philosopher's Stone. And people like Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton in the 1600s, they were very much involved in using this method. It goes back even further. Flamel, Nicholas Flamel, he was also very early in 1300s. He was they call it a scrivener, kind of a scribe. He would write letters for people or legal documents, things like that.
Hmm.
Kind of like a notary public today. Um, anyway, he was also dealing in books. And one day, a stranger came and he had this book it was leaves, metal leaves mounted on wooden plaques.
Hmm.
And he saw it was valuable. He didn't know what it was, but he bought it, and it took him like 20 years to get it translated. He had to travel around and find some old Jewish rabbi who could understand some of the symbols. And um, anyway, it was a text on how to prepare the philosopher's stone. And it began with antimony, um, and then used mercury and gold. The whole process, the idea is that antimony was called the Aries of the philosophers. And Aries is the sign that the sun is exalted in.
Hmm.
Um, and for centuries, antimony, stibnite, was used to purify gold. Even back in what they think was ancient Troy, there's evidence that they were using this process to purify gold.
Mm.
So it goes way back in that sense of using antimony to purify gold. And and one of the writers, Uranius Philalethees, he was a pseudonym of an alchemist named George Starkey. He taught Robert Boyle his first chemistry lessons, and um, he kind of led this double life as George Starkey and Philalethees. He wrote the open entrance to the closed palace of the king, metamorphosis of metals. He wrote a number of alchemical tracts that both Boyle and Newton were very interested in. And and Starkey told Boyle that he knew this guy, Philalethees, and he could get information from him and act as a mediary. And he never told Boyle that he was the same guy. So he had this kind of double life going on. Um, but both Boyle and Isaac Newton were very interested in it. Um, the idea is that antimony is ruled by the earth. Metals have rulerships. Everything is said to have a rulership, like plants. You have Venus ruled plants, you have sun ruled plants, and so on. Um, and all the metals as well. So copper is said to be ruled by Venus, iron by Mars. And when things die, their spiritual essence goes up to that particular level. So when a Venus plant dies, I mean, it decomposes and its material aspects sink into the ground, but its spiritual essence rises up to the sphere of Venus. In Jewish mysticism, that would be Netzach, the sphere of Venus on the tree of life. Um, and so, with all the materials, copper dies, its essence ascends up to the Venus level. When Mars or iron dies, its essence goes up to the sphere of Mars to be recycled and come back through the whole process again. Um, Antimony said to be ruled by the earth. So when it dies, it has nowhere to go but here. So
Right.
you can't really kill antimony. It's said to be immortal.
Mm.
And the idea was to transfer that life force into gold. Gold has spent all of its energy becoming perfect. Its whole life force has developed it into this perfect metal, and now it can't go a step further. That's as far as nature will take it. The idea was that if we infuse this gold, which is now exhausted, with new life, we could push it further than nature can take it. And, and some of the early texts describe the philosopher's stone as being gold, pushed to its highest, most purified essence level, beyond what nature can do. And so the idea was to infuse the gold with this life force of the antimony and push gold to become even more perfect than it is. And that would be the philosopher's stone. And it would be a living gold now, which could transmute other metals. Um, so what they would do is take the antimony, that Marshall Regulus, And the only way they had access to gold was through mercury. So they would make an amalgam of gold and mercury. They didn't use too much of the mineral acids yet. Um, but the regulus of antimony and mercury, they don't combine well. They wanted to infuse the mercury with the life essence of the antimony so that they could use that to take the mercury now that's enlivened with antimony
So,
essence
thanks.
and put it into the gold. So, but they don't amalgamate well. So what they would do is take silver and fuse that with the regulus of antimony. And this was now called the doves of Diana, Diana being the moon.
Hmm.
And now it would form an amalgam with the mercury. And the moon would act as an intermediary and transfer the life force of the antimony into the mercury.
Got it. Yeah, yeah.
So that so then they would distill the mercury out, and that would be called one eagle. And then they take fresh regulus doves of Diana and amalgamate it with the mercury and distill it out again. And they would do that 7 times. So it was
Wow.
called letting 7 eagles fly. Um, so now you have what they called animated mercury. And you would combine that now with gold, a very fine gold powder, and seal that in a hermetically sealed vessel and digest it over a period of time. And crystals of a kind of a saffron reddish color crystal will come up to the top, and that would be the philosopher's stone.
Wow.
And that would have the ability to transmute other metals, prolong life, cure cure everything
Hmm.
basically.
Did they give you any instructions on how it's to be used? Would you take that internally as just a ground crystal, or it would just be wearing it would be enough, or would you have to diffuse it into something else? Or are there any instructions given?
For transmutation, they would take a small amount and wrap it into wax, like a pea-sized ball of wax, and then throw that into molten lead or mercury. They call it projection because you're projecting it in.
Hmm.
If you just throw the powder in, it'll pop and just shoot out. So they wrap it with wax so it can penetrate the surface and then distribute into the mercury or into the molten metal,
Hmm.
lead or mercury generally. And then it would, smoke and hiss and turn into gold.
Wow.
It would transmute the metal. At least that was the plan. And um,
After undergoing all those steps, I mean, how much of the material would you have lost in the process? Would there be a high loss of material, or would it be pretty?
um, there's it takes a lot because you have to do 7 eagles, so it takes a lot of the martial lunar regulus. But the mercury, you're putting it on the regulus and distilling it out, so you get your mercury back.
Hmm.
But then you use fresh regulus and do again, and then again you do that 7 times. Um, and then the amount of gold is variable, and theoretically you get more than the gold because once you've done one process where you have the gold, it can transmute 10 times the amount
Hmm.
of gold. But if you multiply it, do the whole process again using that stone, it will multiply that 10 times. So now you get 100 times.
Oh my God.
And if you do it again, you get 1,000 times. And then if you do it again, 10,000 times. It
Wow.
said once you get up to about uh, six reiterations, 6 cycles of that, multiplying it, you get to the point where it glows. Um, and that's the story behind the ever burning lights. Oil infused with that will basically burn forever. Um, and it said if you go beyond 7 cycles, it becomes very unstable, like nuclear. And some have said that the story behind the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, people turning into pillars of salt,
Mm.
um, yeah, it was due to alchemists pushing the transmutation too far, and it set off a nuke that basically incinerated everyone and everything around it.
Wow.
So the story goes.
So
um,
if you were to, okay, so let's maybe look at the other side of it. So as a rather than a purely alchemical tool to make the philosopher's stone, how about very early references to just medicinal values? Is that a completely different path, or are we looking at the same kind of? Is there any kind of purification like the Indian system? Are they employing any kind of Shodana? So he doesn't need to go through all those processes. There's a way to just directly extract that immortality from the Regulus and sorry, not the Regulus, from the Antimony, and be able to take that as a medicine. Is that possible?
yeah, yeah, that's been my work. I'm not so much interested in the philosopher's stone transmutation, although I've done work in that area and we teach about it, in classes because there's so much interest and it's
Mm.
part of the tradition. But my interests have always been the medicinal side of it, and I think the tincture of antimony, combined with a tincture made from gold, are amazing. They're the strongest medicinal substance I've seen to date. I think the combination is amazing. And here again you have that gold antimony duality where gold is purified or augmented by the antimony to become more than just a simple gold tincture. I mean, I've used it over the years. We have a product called the elixir Paracelsus, and it's basically aloe, saffron, and myrrh. That is, it contains the oil of gold and the oil of antimony, and it's it's cured everything we've thrown at it.
Mm.
People with like, I know, I had one person had a tumor in their stomach the size of an egg. It was hard lump, and they were going to have it removed. And they started taking this elixir,
Mm.
and by the time they went in, um, it had shrunk so small they were having trouble finding it. And Karen, my wife, she had a small melanoma right between her eyes, and she started putting it on externally. And it was a couple of weeks before they went in. She was scheduled to have it removed,
Mm.
and they went in, and they're in there like it was here, wasn't it? It was in right here, wasn't it? They couldn't find it. They dug a hole in there anyway, just for fun, I guess. But um, I originally made the formula for a friend who was also a student at the PRS. He collapsed one day. He was a little older than me. He collapsed one day out with his son, and they took him to the hospital, and they said he had acute myeloid leukemia, and they wanted to do immediate chemotherapy. He said without it, you're going to die within the month. Uh, but he was real curmudgeon about chemotherapy. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. And he
Mm.
got a hold of me and asked if I could brew up something to send to him. Um, so I said, okay, I'm on it. So I made this tincture for him. And in the meantime, they had convinced him to do a short round of chemo, a 5 day short round, and his legs ballooned up with edema, and he went into cardiac arrest and tore his
Okay.
mitral valve, and so it messed him up even worse. Um, and then he finally got it. I mean, it took a few days for me to make it and send it down to him,
Mm.
but he finally got it. Started taking it. 3 days later, he walked out of the hospital.
It's a good
His
job to do by the sounds of it. Get away.
his uncle his his main doctor, oncologist, was looking at his paperwork, saying it's impossible. There, you have no traces of leukemia in you. I mean, it's not in remission. It's just not there. There's
Mm,
no sign or evidence that you ever had it.
mm,
And his cardiologist, looking at his cardiogram, was saying it's impossible. The damage to your heart was too extensive. It couldn't have healed like this that fast.
mm,
But here he had his cardiogram was perfect. Um, so he walked out fully cured, and it never came back. He went in for checkups monthly, and it never came back.
mm.
But during that whole time, I mean, it never came back. And I see that all the time. People telling me their stories. Oh, it's cured this and cured that, and
And
so
always with an antimony base. That's the base of the of many of these remedies.
the golden antimony, yeah,
Yeah.
along with the aloe, saffron, myrrh as
Uh,
the herbal compound that goes
which
with it.
also very powerful in its
Yeah,
own rights as well.
yeah. Paracelsus called it his elixir of property, and it was a famous preparation. But how he made it was really obscure. He says, you know, you use equal parts of aloe, saffron, myrrh, and then he gets really cryptic about what to do next, saying
They
use
always do.
put in the treat it with the alkahest and the circulatum and this and that, and so my take on it was to add the gold and antimony oils. Um, so those are prepared separately. Gold has its own process, and the antimony, and then I add the oils to the aloe, saffron, myrrh, and um, yeah, we have that product available in our store. Um, so it's very popular. It's like I said, it's cured everything so far we've thrown at it. It does amazing things.
We spoke about like the 1400, 1300. So is there anything prior to that medicinally that's mentioned, or is it really starting to fall back into like the Indian tradition? They're using it more for, externally, or just as a kohl, or a, is there anything? I'm just trying to sort of make that link of how, why was it sort of not really explored so much in the East? Why didn't they do more with it and try and maybe extract? Because they could do these extractions, they could take these metals out. I wonder why they weren't trying to do more with it.
No, they do. Roger Bacon in 1200s mentions antimony and making the tincture from antimony. Um, there's another Artephius around 1100. He talks about using antimony, and he talks about a wet way of making the philosopher's stone using antimony and gold, very similar. But with medicinal intents, not so much transmutation, but making medicines that way.
Mm,
And there was, after, I'd say it was in the 1400s, 1500s, there was so much abuse. I mean, people had heard about this and gone wild trying to make it and
mm,
doing it wrong, that a lot of people got poisoned. And a lot of people were dying from antimony preparations that were improperly made. And so the medical association banned it from use. Physicians had to sign a paper saying that they wouldn't employ antimony in their medical practice.
mm,
Um, and it wasn't, it was about 100 years that it was banned from use, although people were still working with it,
mm,
behind the scenes. And it wasn't until there was some, I forget what country, there was some dignitary, a king or a prince or something, who was deathly ill and nothing was working to cure him. And a doctor, at a last ditch attempt, gave him a dose of an antimony preparation and it cured him. And so they lifted the ban, and, interest and work on antimony resumed, even in the medical profession. They still use antimony today, but more for its toxic and parasitic attributes. Um,
what is its main use? What's the common use of antimony? They're mining it and all the time. So what's the primary use for it industrially? Say.
Today, it's a semiconductor. It's in my computer and yours. It's in all the electronics. They use it in matches, fireworks. They use it in hardening alloys, metals, so bearings.
Hmm.
They use it in ball bearings, things like that, to harden them. It'll make metals so hard they'll fracture like glass. So right proportions can harden alloys like steel into a very hard substance, which is low friction. It has 1,000 uses. They used to use it a lot in fire retardants, put it in fabrics to keep them flame proof, paints, things like that. Um, so yeah, it has 1,001 uses today, but on the medicine side, it's more still for its toxic effects. They have tartar emetic, which is still in the pharmacopoeia, and it basically makes you vomit.
Mm.
And there are other ones that they get rid of parasites, things like that, because of their toxic nature. But as far as curative for cancer, there's been little work on that. Um, so there's still a lot to explore in antimony. And I don't know if you saw my new book.
I
Uh,
think you were working on, or it was close to publishing last time I spoke to you.
the dragon is actually taken from a picture in the book. If I can find it here, from making the glass.
Oh wow, yeah, that really
You can
looks like a
see it.
dragon as well.
This is like the royal orb. You see it a lot in alchemical iconography. So this is my story of like my journey with antimony,
Okay.
how I got involved with it, and the work I did at Paralab, the notes I took at the PRS, and and there's still a lot more to write. That's volume one, so I have
Wow.
another in mind. Um, Frater Albertus mentioned he was going to write the book on antimony, and it never came out. And at one of the alchemy conferences in 2009, I think, I met up with his daughter. I'd met her earlier when I was in class at the PRS, but we met up again at one of the alchemy conferences, and she mentioned that she had all of the papers and documents from Paralab and the PRS in her basement.
Hmm.
And all she wanted was the biographical information on her dad. And she said she would keep all the technical stuff aside for me. And I said, okay, that's a great plan.
Wow.
So, so a few years ago, she got a hold of me and asked me if I still wanted all of that. And so I said, yeah. So next day we're on the road, um, and drove all the way down to Salt Lake and filled a whole car up, a van, with boxes of books and papers from the PRS and Paralab. And some of them were marked, with my name, and there were some boxes of glassware that was at Paralab and an old balance, analytical balance. But I got them home, and a lot of these were like I just saw that they were binders that were from Paralab and PRS, and I recognized them. I didn't even open them up. I knew I wanted them, so we took them all, and I unloaded them in my lab, and then crashed for a day because we've been driving straight for 2 days. Um, but then when I came out, I opened up the top box. I saw all these binders, and I opened one up, and it's full of lab reports. Whenever we did a lab experiment at the PRS, we had to fill out a lab report.
Mm.
So I flipped the page, and there's my signature along with all the
Oh
other
wow.
students. So, oh, I know what this book's about. So I put that one in, and I pull out the next volume, and I open it up, and it's all in German. But the page I opened up to said in big letters, it basically translated to greetings, Herr Spagyricus. So I thought, okay, now they're talking to me. So I put that volume back in and pulled out the next one and opened it up, and it's the book on antimony by Frater Albertus,
Oh wow.
handwritten. So I have the preface and intro and parts of a couple of chapters, all handwritten and proofread by Frater Albertus, which I want to publish that next. So I kind of have the picture of what he had in mind as far as, because he have all these books together with experiments and lab reports and stuff. So I'm going to piece all of that together and put that out as the book on antimony posthumously by Frater Albertus.
Wow.
Then I have
How far are you down the road of doing that then? How much more work have you got to do to complete, do you think?
it's got a lot. I'm going to put in footnotes and commentaries that will clear up some ideas. I want to add pictures, photographs, and charts and things like that.
Mm.
But I have collaborated. I've got a person who could type, so she'll work on the typing, and I'll add an introduction or preface anyway. And like I say, a lot of footnotes on things that he mentions, and I could clarify them. So it's probably another year away. But that's one of my winter jobs.
Mm. That's
So
a hell of
I
a
pulled
winter
all that
job.
out. Yeah.
Not a five
So
minute job at all. I mean, having done a few books, I know what's involved, but yeah, it's not something I'd readily dive back into. It's a lot of work.
it is. Yeah. And I was just looking at it the other day because I knew we were going to talk, and it came to mind, and I pulled it all out again. And I've got some ideas. I think it'll go fairly easily. I say that now, but
Could you see you
could change.
integrating any of that into what you're doing? Would you take any of the what
Yeah,
he was doing
yeah, I'm
and
going
bring it
to,
into the school?
yeah, yeah, because I have experiments going even now, and experience since I've written the other book. So,
Mm.
I've got a whole another volume that I could write on antimony. It's like Basil said, there's one man's life isn't long enough.
Mm.
So I've got a lot on that, and there's still so much that I haven't even touched on. I mean, I talked about one way of making the Philosopher's Stone. There are at least half a dozen others. There's a dry way by Fulcanelli. There are other dry ways, wet ways. So there are a number of avenues to research as far as making the Philosopher's Stone, and also medicinal compounds from the antimony. I mean,
Mm.
it's an amazing substance. I mean, there's so many ways to treat it and manipulate it and come out with so many things. Even in Basil Valentine's book, he lists dozens of different preparations of antimony and how to work with it, and amazing things that come out of it. So he talks about the oil, the balm, the essence, and the quintessence of antimony. Each one a different preparation.
Mm.
With its own amazing properties. So it's an amazing material. So that's why it's so popular in Western alchemy, because there are so many avenues to approach it,
Mm.
and there's a lot been written about it. And I don't know. I think with the whole transition from alchemy into modern chemistry, um, alchemy kind of got I don't know, the short end of the stick, because a lot of people were interested, like in the Royal Society in England. Most of the people attending there, like Robert Boyle and other members like Isaac Newton, and most of them were interested in alchemy. But certain people who were holding the purse strings kind of got screwed over by antimony peddlers, and they didn't trust alchemy, so they were against it.
Mm.
And pretty soon they banned talking about alchemical processes in the meetings of the society.
Mm,
So even though they were all interested in doing it, they couldn't talk about it
mm,
at the society meetings. And so they kind of drifted back and back into the background, and people forgot about it. And a lot of the ideas got, you know, misplaced and forgotten. And so it didn't get a fair shake as far as, all that alchemy could actually produce. Modern chemistry came from alchemy.
mm. Well, that's one thing I liked about doing the work in India and Sri Lanka. You know, they're still making it on a daily basis. If you go into many pharmacies, they have an alchemical department, if you like, and they're making limited amounts of things. It's not, obviously it's not the top end. They're not using sort of like really fabulous gemstones and gold and silver.
Yeah,
Those are being used to some extent, but you know,
yeah,
it's a living process. They're making things all the time, so that's great to see that. And I think maybe
yeah,
Greco-Arabic, you know, the sort of Unani system, the same very much. They're still making a lot of these preparations, so it's still alive. It's just kind of morphed into something else. But maybe
yeah.
its day is
It's
coming again. Like people are coming to you from all over the world for your school, so
uh,
people are
alchemy
interested.
is alchemy is still alive in certain countries. In Germany, especially, they still have spagyric pharmacies. They call them spagyric, and that was a term developed by Paracelsus. Spagyric means it's two Greek words meaning to separate and to recombine, meaning you separate out the three essentials, the body, soul, and spirit, purify those, and then put them back together as a elevated living medicine. And there are still spagyric pharmacies in Germany, several. So it hasn't died completely, but it did go through a period where it was banned. It was outlawed several times, on pain of death if you're caught practicing alchemy. Um, Even though, I mean, it was banned by the church, even though several popes were heavily involved in alchemical pursuits. So, um, yeah, I think there's still a lot to be revealed about alchemical medicines, what they can actually do when they're properly made. I hope to contribute some small amount, at least pique some interest for
You're
what.
being modest. I think you've done more than that. So rounding up nicely on that, coming back to that topic. So if people are interested in, obviously we did our talk a year ago, so I'd encourage people to go back and watch that, so that you can see that on this channel. I think are you still doing live classes, or can people come and see you in
Uh,
person? How's it work?
we're doing both. We have the online classes,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's under the wing of TriStar Alchemy Foundation, which TriStar was Frater Albertus's dream, which would be combining the class instruction, a working laboratory producing the materials, and a clinic actually putting the materials to use. And those were the three stars, TriStar. So we have TriStar, a nonprofit organization developed for um, tax write-offs on donations, things like that for future research. But we have the online school, Spagiricus classes. We have prima, secunda, tertia levels. And we do workshops and live classes here as well. So each year we go through at least one round of classes. Classes are like 3-day intensives of they're anywhere from 8 to 10 hours a day of lecture and lab work for 3 days on Prima is all about the plant works and introduction to alchemical principles and ideas. Secunda is takes off from there, and we look at salts and minerals of animal origin, like feathers and bones and things. And the water works, all works just from rainwater and do things like that. And then we get into tertia, which is the actual mineral and metallic works. And it's kind of a graded thing so that by the time you get to tertia, you feel confident in the lab, you're familiar with all the different processes. Because working with minerals and metals, you got high temperatures and powerful acids, things like that. So
Mm.
uh, you want to you want to have your lab feet,
Yeah.
under you. So, so we teach you how to do that from basically, nothing. And I like to show ways of doing it cheaply, inexpensively.
Mm.
You don't have to put a second mortgage on your house or sell off a kid or something
And there's
to
almost something traditional about that as well, isn't there? There's almost, I think a lot of these guys were pioneers, so they weren't going to the hardware store and buying this stuff. It was literally
yeah, yeah,
homemade. So,
yeah. And I've lived in rural settings for most of my life, and so I had to scratch and make do with what I had available. And so I make a lot of my own equipment out of cheap things. You can get by. I mean, I do have a whole laboratory of fancy equipment, but I have made my own equipment out of cheap things like I borrow things from the Indian alchemists, the clay smeared cloth idea of sealing things. That's one of my favorites. It's saved so much glassware. Coating glass with clay smeared cloth for high
yeah.
temperatures and things like that. I built equipment furnaces and things out of tin cans and clay smeared cloth. Worked
Mm.
great. So,
I mean, even I was
uh,
looking at, in India, like sort of seeing a lot of these pots were they'll just use a bit of sesame oil and egg white and just make a batter and then sort of paint the pots with it. And then they just become magically waterproof. So you don't even have to have big
yeah,
pots. It's a very cheap way of making stuff waterproof
yeah,
and sealed, or fire resistant.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Plus, I'm making crucibles. I go through a lot of crucibles, so I make my own crucibles generally. Slip casting, so we show you how to do that. Very easy to do. So we show cheap ways. So yeah, we have the online class, and then the in-person classes, always very popular. And then we have a series of workshops that we do, like the gemstone class. We have an upcoming class on cycles, the universe, astrological cycles and things. So yeah, we stay busy all year.
And can people get the books are all available on your website? People want to get hold of the books, or what about the remedies? The remedies are all you could get this from you.
Yeah, they're all there. Spagyricus.com. You can go there. We have listing for all the medicines. We have cell salts, tinctures from metals, some herbal tinctures. So those are all available, and all the books are available as well. So
Okay, cool. Well, I'm sure people will avail themselves of all that. So, yeah, wrapping it up there. So, thank you, Robert. Really appreciate you coming back. It's been fascinating. I've learned a lot about antimony. It's never going to be the same again. I'm always going to get that picture of you mining it. It's just stuck in my head forever now. So it was great to hear that story. And yeah, I'm sure people will be in touch. I'd highly recommend contacting Robert. There's on Instagram, website. Readily, I'll put all the links up afterwards. I mean, they're readily and easily connectable with you. Things happening all the time. You're posting a lot at the moment, so I recommend people check you out on those social media sites. So yeah. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. We've only scratched the surface on antimony, but yeah, it was fun. And we'll do it again.